Your opinion doesn't matter. I bet our money does. I bet people's money does. I bet that matters on merch and on tickets, etc. Boy, y'all got a little pay bump. You got full of yourself real fast. But before we get into Erica Wheeler, let's go to something that I have been very vocal about. If it was my league, Adam Silver.
The Dallas Wings have found themselves at the center of two separate controversies within a short span, and neither has reflected particularly well on the franchise or the league as a whole. The first involves Azzi Fudd's selection with the #1 overall pick. In the lead up to the draft, virtually no mock draft had Fudd going first. Lauren Betts was widely regarded as the stronger basketball prospect, and the consensus heading into draft night pointed elsewhere.
If it was my league, Adam Silver, Kathy Engelbert, the WNBA, if you want to be viewed by a lot of people as a professional, organized basketball league, one of the first steps you would make would be to abolish player interleague relationships on a personal level. All right? Yeah, you can be friends. That's fine.
What made the Wings' decision so heavily scrutinized was the well-known fact that Fudd is in a relationship with Paige Buecker, Dallas's marquee player. The timing and logic of the pick led a significant portion of observers to conclude that the franchise drafted Fudd less on basketball merit and more to keep their star player happy, a perception that the Wings did little to push back on effectively. That perception became a full-blown story when a reporter at a press conference asked Fudd directly about her relationship with Buecker and whether the two had spoken with other couples in the league about navigating the teammate dynamic. It was a reasonable question, given the circumstances. Buecker herself had publicly confirmed the relationship on TikTok the previous year.
Be friends, that's fine. But as long as you're active players, you're not going to be dating. You're certainly not going to be playing on the same team. I've said there's a conflict of interest. Perfect example. There was a time when Dejanay Carrington was on one team and Alyssa Smith was on the other, and they were a couple opposing each other in games. So we're just sharing locker room information.
Instead of letting Fudd respond and allowing the moment to pass, the Wings organization immediately shut it down, with a team representative stepping in to say the organization does not comment on players' personal lives. The question was never answered, the press conference moved on, and the story only grew larger as a result. What could have been a brief, manageable exchange instead became a widely circulated moment that reinforced existing doubts about how the franchise handled the entire situation. The argument being made in various corners of the sports media landscape is that the league cannot selectively highlight certain relationships when it suits a narrative while simultaneously blocking questions about those same relationships when they become inconvenient.
And all over the place. This entire league. All these leagues go to all this trouble to try to keep what they do in their locker room strategically, all of this separate from other players across the league. Any league, professional. Can you imagine this in the National Football League where everything is so secretive? College football, come on, forget about it. So,
the contradiction was not lost on people watching, and the handling of that press conference drew significant criticism. Separately, veteran guard Erica Wheeler drew backlash after a social media post that many interpreted as dismissive toward fans based on their income level. The post suggested that criticism from people below a certain earnings threshold was not worth engaging with. The reaction was swift.
Forget about it. So, I think a lot of us suspect the Dallas Wings drafted Azzi Fudd just because she is the girlfriend of Paige Buecker. I'm going to be honest. You want to talk about not a professional league? That's exactly what I think happened here. They drafted Fudd to keep Paige happy. That's my opinion. I'm going to stick to it. Don't care if you like that.
fans pointed out that the working-class audiences who buy tickets and merchandise are the financial foundation the league depends on, and alienating them over salary commentary was widely seen as a serious miscalculation. Wheeler later attempted to walk the statement back, clarifying that the post was aimed specifically at people who genuinely do not want WNBA players to succeed financially, not at fans who have supported the league through its lean years. The clarification softened some of the criticism but did not fully extinguish it. The broader point that came up repeatedly in responses was that discussing player salaries relative to performance is completely standard sports conversation, not a form of disrespect, and that treating it as an attack signals a disconnect between some players and the general sports audience they are trying to bring in.
I'm going to stick to it. Don't care if you don't care if you like that or not. I don't. And a reporter asked a question, a valid question, that they really should have just allowed AZ to have answered, because it would have put the question to bed and moved on. Now you got a massive story. And this is catching fire everywhere. Why? Because, this entire league wants to celebrate all these same-sex relationships.
Taken together, both situations point to a recurring tension in how the league and its players engage with a fan base that is still being built. The Wings press conference incident, the FUD selection questions, and the Wheeler controversy all fed into a single narrative that dominated discussion for several days, one focused almost entirely on off-court issues rather than basketball. The Dallas Wings' decision to shut down a reporter's question about Ozzy Fudd and Paige Bueckers at a recent press conference has created exactly the kind of problem the organization was presumably trying to avoid. A journalist from the Dallas Morning News asked a straightforward question whether the two players were still in a relationship, and whether they had spoken with other couples in the league about managing that dynamic as professional teammates.
Sex relationships. But if anybody wants to ask a responsible question that a lot of fans want to know, and if you want this league to be taken seriously, you should allow it to be answered. You shut down this reporter. And bravo to whatever reporter actually had the guts to do this, because you're already seeing people are triggered that this man asked this question.
The Wings media handler stepped in immediately, stated the organization would not be commenting on players' personal lives, and moved to the next question. The outcome of that response is a story that now refuses to go away. By refusing to engage with the question at all, the organization has essentially guaranteed it will be raised at every subsequent media availability for the foreseeable future. This is a textbook Streisand effect. The attempt to suppress a topic amplifies it far beyond what a brief, measured answer would have produced.
And people are triggered that this man asked this question. Grow up. He should have asked it.
Paige announced last year on TikTok that y'all were a couple. And I'm wondering if that is still the case, and if so, if y'all have talked to any other couples in the league about how they negotiate that dynamic as pro teammates.
I understand why you have to ask that question, but we're going to respectfully decline from commenting on our players' personal lives. Go to the next question.
Okay. The guy asked, you're in a personal relationship with Paige.
The underlying issue goes beyond media management. The question of whether Azzi Fudd would have been selected first overall without her connection to Bueckers is one that has followed this draft pick since it was announced. Evaluating Fudd purely on basketball merit, her skill set is narrower than what typically justifies the top selection. Her shooting ability and court vision are genuine and translate well at the professional level.
I understand why you have to ask that question, but we're going to respectfully decline from commenting on our players' personal lives. Go to the next question.
So basically, somebody asked about just a general question about whether or not her and Paige were still together, and they were just like, yeah, we're not answering that question. The reality is that all they have now done,
outside of those two attributes, the case for her as a franchise-altering prospect is limited. Her realistic ceiling as a contributor sits closer to a third option than a primary one, which is an unusual profile for a number 1 overall pick. If she had entered the previous year's draft class, projections place her somewhere in the 7th to 10th range rather than at the top. There is also a contextual factor worth noting. This particular draft class was weaker than average at the top, partly because several players who would have been seniors chose to return for additional college eligibility.
That all they have now done is started every single question. They have made sure that that question will control everything. Because let's be completely real. The relationship status or potential relationship status of Paige Buecker and AZ Fudd was at least a factor. Or, I'm not even going to say a factor. I think a lot of people believe it was at least a factor in her being drafted there. And this is why I've always said it. It would have been
That compressed the talent at the top and made the decision easier to rationalize. But even accounting for that, there were players in the draft who present a stronger professional case. Sia Rivers, for example, represents a more convincing selection at that range. The Wings organization has also provided its own precedent for this kind of scrutiny.
in her being drafted there. And this is why I've always said it. It would have been better for AZ Fudd to have not been drafted in Minnesota. Do I think AZ Fudd is likely going to be the worst number one overall pick in non-Charlie Collier number one overall pick? And the reason I say non-Charlie Collier is that everybody that would have been a senior that year went back and played another year in college. Because of the way that season worked. And it just happened to be a really bad year as well. Like, it was the year of freshman won National Player of the Year.
Their general manager previously made comments that were widely interpreted as suggesting the team acquired Alyssa Thomas specifically to bring in DJ Carrington alongside her. Whether or not that was the actual motivation, the implication stuck. When the same organization then selects a player who publicly announced a relationship with their franchise centerpiece, the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. The question of whether Fudd was drafted to keep Bueckers happy is going to be a recurring part of the Wings media narrative, whether the front office addresses it or not.
First Charlie Collier, number one overall pick in 20 years, yes. Do I think that anyone other than our fam, you could even really justify in hindsight to take it number one? Like, I think in general, it's hard to even justify in hindsight taking anyone else or than our fam. Because at least there is that star potential there. And with AZ, like, her potential might be fifth starter. Like, that might be her seeding.
From a pure basketball standpoint, the fit is also questionable. Fudd's shooting at high volume works in most team contexts because her efficiency justifies the attempts. But Dallas is not an ideal environment for her development. Minnesota would likely have selected her at second overall, and Washington at fourth would have placed her alongside a player like Rickea Jackson, where the spacing and roll would have been cleaner.
She might have already hit her ceiling, honestly. And AZ would have been... If AZ's taking 5 or 6, no one's questioning this. Like, if AZ's taken in that Haquez spot, no one's questioning it. And is AZ better than Haquez? I don't know. Like, that's kind of the level I put AZ Fudd at. She has one skill that translates extremely well and doesn't do anything else. I don't believe she has any other skill other than IQ and shooting that translates to the next level. And is like...
The Chicago Sky's current roster construction is arguably the best possible fit for what Fudd does. As for the personal relationship itself, there is no meaningful basketball reason to view it as a problem if both players handle it professionally. Successful partnerships between teammates who are also partners have existed at the highest levels of the sport. Courtney Vandersloot and Allie Quigley played together through multiple championship runs.
And is like she's not even a secondary option, she's a tertiary option at best. So we've never seen in sports, the only time we've ever seen a person who projects to be a tertiary option going number one is Zachary Rizichet. So obviously, there is that question: is like, would she have gone number one without the relationship status with Paige? And it's like, I don't know, but the fact is that it's always going to be a question, and it's not one of these things like
professionals can separate what happens off the court from what happens on it. There is no particular reason to assume Fudd and Bueckers cannot do the same. The concern is not the relationship; it is the media environment it creates. When outside noise becomes the dominant story surrounding two players, it takes focus away from the basketball.
And it's not one of these things like she should have been drafted 10th and went first. But in my opinion, her ability level is closer to that of a 10th pick in general, or especially in the last couple of years in the first pick. Like, I think if she goes in last year's draft, she might go 7th or 8th. Like, I'd take Sanaya Rivers over. I'd take her over Elisa Morrow, but I'd take Sanaya Rivers over. She definitely wouldn't have gone top 5 if she didn't go for a super senior season. That's for sure. Like, Jacita is absolutely unbelievable.
During a period when DJ Carrington was publicly directing criticism at Caitlin Clark, and Clark was repeatedly called into press conferences to respond to questions far outside the scope of the sport, her on-court performance visibly dipped. That was one of the stretches where she recorded her lowest scoring output of the season. Being forced to manage a narrative that has nothing to do with basketball does affect players, regardless of how professional they are. The Wings had an opportunity to neutralize this story early.
For sure. Like, Jacita is absolutely unbelievable, who went 5th. And maybe a better pick than Georgia Amore, I guess. But yeah, it's a weird one, but because obviously nothing's being said, these are questions that are always going to be asked, and this is why you're like, oh, was it even worth it taking her at number 1? Because, like, she wasn't a surefire number 1. She doesn't fit well with the 2 guards. Like, I'll talk about it later, but the coach was asked how to.
A brief, direct response, acknowledging the question and redirecting to basketball would have removed most of the oxygen from it. Instead, the decision to shut it down entirely has done the opposite. The questions will continue to come for Fudd at her own press availabilities and for Bueckers every time a reporter has access. Whether the organization eventually changes its approach or continues to deflect, the subject is not going away until both players decide to address it on their own terms.